anything that happens on chain is inherently trustless, which I think is a massive difference between what I saw happening at Robinhood. Robinhood, you needed to trust Vlad and Beju to be doing the right thing. Same kind of thing at 3AC and FTX, right? Like you need to be trust the leadership to be doing the right thing. If they do anything wrong, then you have no idea what's actually going on behind the scenes. So after going through that experience, my co-founder and I, we started building a decentralized exchange initially. So we wanted to build a DEX because it would be transparent. We thought that would help a lot of the problems we saw with Robinhood. This led to us looking into all the infrastructure we could use to build an exchange. And we ended up coming to the conclusion that no existing infrastructure right now actually works for building an exchange well.
Find a place where you can take some notes because this episode has absolutely so much alpha. This is a conversation with Jay Jog, the founder of Sei Labs. In this, we speak about his journey from working in Robinhood to now being a decentralization maxi. We speak about why L2s are probably not the right approach to scale L1s. Do you agree? Think about it. We speak about the Sei ecosystem at length, which is booming right now, and I'm following it every day. So exciting. And lastly, he gives amazing lessons on being a founder, whether you're in the Web3 space or Web2 space, really doesn't matter. So don't miss this one. I'm Diksha. You're listening to Web3 Quest. Enjoy the conversation. I was just reading about you. You got into crypto in 2017 and you started building Sei in the end of 2021. You've been with Robinhood. And, it's like a nice combination of events. So tell us, what are the incidents that led you to building an L1 in 2023? What is your motivation to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. My background is I grew up in the Bay Area. I ended up meeting my co-founder through speech and debate back in high school. So in Bay Area high school, speech and debate is like this really popular extracurricular to be doing. And our teams would occasionally do practice debates against each other. So I met him through a practice debate back in sophomore year of high school, which is over 10 years ago now. And we just stayed in touch ever since then, right? After that, I went to UCLA to study computer science. So I'm a software engineer by trade. And I got into crypto back in 2017, as you said. At that time, my roommate, he was going through Binance Labs. 2017 was an absolutely crazy time as well, just all things considered related to crypto. He was going through Binance Labs. So we ended up working together on a couple of different projects. And after that, I ended up joining Robinhood. The Robinhood, the one with all the stuff that went down back in 2021. I spent almost 4 years at Robinhood. I joined as a software engineer. I eventually became an engineering lead over there. So spent all of my time doing engineering related work. And I was an engineering lead when the entire Gamestop saga happened 2 years ago. So for any listeners that might not be super familiar with it, there was several meme stocks, roughly a dozen meme stocks that were just basically mooning, right? So it was GameStop, AMC, several others. And these weren't like hot new stocks or anything. These were kind of boring old stocks that for some reason retail, a lot of normal people just rallied behind them and they started buying them. So the price of these stocks started going up a lot. Then there were hedge funds who saw this. They're like, this logically makes no sense. These stocks are overvalued. So we're going to be shorting them. So hedge funds were betting against these stocks. Retail was helping drive the price of these stocks up. And as a result of that, hedge funds were starting to get short squeezed because they made this like rational bet, but the market is very clearly irrational. So then hedge funds were losing a lot of money. It was this very true Robinhood moment, right? Where you were taking money from the rich and distributing it to the poor. And Robinhood was the main place where all of this trading activity was happening, right? Like Robinhood was the primary place where a bunch of like 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds from the United States would go and start trading for the first time. They'd find out about it from Wall Street Bets, which is this fun subreddit that people would go to. Robinhood was the place where all this activity was happening. And then it was phenomenal for Robinhood, right? Because it was getting a lot of like trading demand, a lot of trading volume from that. And then just one day, completely out of the blue, Robinhood just turned off buys. So if I were to go there, if you were to go there, we would not be able to buy GameStop anymore. And that's where most of the buy demand was coming from, right? Like Robinhood users were leading to this buy pressure. So the stock price for these assets started to drop. And everyone just around the country was just, first of all, very confused because no one had any idea why Robinhood was making these decisions. And people were understandably also very pissed because they were losing money. So when that happened, a bunch of my old colleagues, friends, they reached out to me. They're like, yo, man, what the hell is happening? And I mean, I had no idea what to be telling them because I'm like, I don't know, like Vlad, Beju, they did something and now I'm learning about it at the same time as you, right? So you just feel so incredibly powerless when something like this happens because you have no agency in a situation like that. It's these people at the top that are calling the shots. It's completely opaque, right? Like there's no transparency, you have no clue what's going on. It just feels super, super frustrating. You have no agency. So that was terrible. My team was also asking me questions, right? And I couldn't tell them anything. So after going through that experience myself, I became much more of a decentralization maxi because anything that happens on chain is inherently trustless, which I think is a massive difference between what I saw happening at Robinhood. At Robinhood, you needed to trust Vlad and Beju to be doing the right thing. Same kind of thing at 3AC and FTX, right? Like you need to be trust the leadership to be doing the right thing. If they do anything wrong, then you have no idea what's actually going on behind the scenes. So after going through that experience, my co-founder and I, we started building a decentralized exchange initially. So we wanted to build a DEX because it'd be transparent. We thought that would help a lot of the problems we saw with Robinhood. This led to us looking into all the infrastructure we could use to build an exchange. And we ended up coming to the conclusion that no existing infrastructure right now actually works for building an exchange well. And that is why we started to build our own layer one blockchain. And yeah, that's exactly what Sei is. It's a general purpose layer one where we've optimized every single part of the stack to help give trading applications and exchanges the best possible experience.
Why do you say that no other blockchain lets you build a good infrastructure for exchanges? I mean, I'm sure you went through your research and there are reasons. And because like, I think it would be a normal question to say like, why not just have an L2 and do this?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, we can also talk about like layer ones versus layer twos. I fundamentally do not think that layer twos are the right approach. I think that if you're building it on top of Ethereum, it cannot scale. So, I mean, maybe we could talk about that in a little bit. But to your core question, like, why doesn't this work on other infrastructure? So we actually looked at the existing infrastructure at the time. Ethereum and Solana were the most popular back at the end of 2021. Since then, Aptos and 3 have also started gaining more popularity. And there's some technical problems that you run into with all of these alternate chains, right? The biggest one is around time to finality. So time to finality is how long it takes. If you, Diksha, were to submit a transaction, how long it would take for that to actually be part of the blockchain. In most other ecosystems, the time to finality is very, very long, right? In the case of Ethereum, it'll take dozens of seconds, if not minutes. In the case of a lot of these high throughput fast chains like Solana, it'll still be more than 3 seconds for a transaction to actually be finalized. And that's a really, really bad user experience. The world that we imagine 5 years from now is one where there's no difference between trading on a centralized exchange like Coinbase or Binance and trading on chain, like trading on Uniswap. Right now, if you try to trade on Uniswap, it takes a long time for anything to happen. And we just don't think that's what's going to be there in the future, right? So time to finality is a massive problem. And it's made even worse if you're a market maker providing liquidity on chain, because this results in you needing to take on more risk. And especially if there's things like reorgs that are possible, which is the case with Ethereum and Solana, where blocks can be added to the network and then reverted. That leads to additional issues. So that was one of the most fundamental problems that we saw. Besides that, we noticed that gas fees were too high. And that's just because there wasn't high enough throughput. If you could only support like tens of transactions per second, then the cost of including your transaction is really expensive. So you really do need a high throughput chain to enable low gas fees for users. And we also noticed that there were problems around user experiences through front running. So we decided, okay, let's start and build just infrastructure where we specialize every single part of the stack to help give exchanges and trading applications the best type of experience. So, from a technical side, we made use of twin turbo consensus. So this is a consensus mechanism that lets us get 400 millisecond time to finality. We are the only chain in existence to do this, and we are also the fastest chain as a result of this. So 400 milliseconds is 10x faster than what you would see with Solana and other chains that are 3+ second time to finality. We're able to get around 20,000 orders per second. And there's also front running prevention built into the chain itself.
You said a very interesting thing that L2s can't solve the problem. Why do you say that?
Yeah, so there's different flavors of L2s. There's smart contract rollups that are built on top of Ethereum. So this would be something like Arbitrum, Optimism, where you have computation happening off-chain, and then you use Ethereum for settlement and data availability. Then there's another class of sovereign rollups, which are essentially they're independent chains, and then they would use something like Celestia for data availability. We don't think that either of these approaches make sense. So with regards to smart contract rollup based on Ethereum approach, the fundamental limitation is that data availability piece. You do a bunch of stuff off-chain, then you take compressed transactions, and then you need to write them to Ethereum, the base layer, right? And this data that is being written is expensive. On Ethereum right now, it costs 16 gas per byte of data that is written. And if you do the math, then that means that if all of the block space on Ethereum, the L1, is used only for ETH transfers that are happening on like Optimism or Arbitrum or any of these other smart contract rollups, the upper bound you can get is 6,000 transactions per second. And I mean, in reality, you are going to not only be doing ETH transfers, you'll be doing stuff like ERC20 transfers, Uniswap kind of smart contract calls and stuff as well. So that's why if you look at what the actual throughput is, most of these L2s are only getting dozens of TPS. And that is definitely not scalable. Ethereum has some things on their roadmap like prototing sharding to help here, but prototing sharding doesn't really solve any problems. That only gets you up to 6.7K TPS for the upper bound. So we fundamentally just don't think that this approach scales if you're using Ethereum for data availability. Now, with this sovereign rollup approach, we actually don't think the value proposition for sovereign rollups is that strong because it's essentially its own independent L1, except it's using like Celestia or something for data availability. And that doesn't really solve that big of a problem. If you need like the core thing that like Celestia would help out with over there is like data availability sampling. But you can build all of these things into the L1 itself without needing to have like, if you have like two moving parts, that adds a lot more complexity to the engineering design. If one of them goes down, then that results in the entire chain having liveness issues. So it's just better to have everything be integrated into one component rather than having multiple dependencies that could each go down and result in issues.
Interesting. So I think my question is that what is your approach to get more people to build on Sei at this point where other L1s and, ecosystems like have a strong, strong noise around them? I don't know, for the lack of a better word, So how are you getting more projects to build on Sei? How does that roadmap look like? What is your argument? What are developers looking for? And I'm presuming that developers is one of the main target audience that you want to have on Sei. So take me through that a bit.
Yeah, so I think the biggest reason is that developers resonate with our mission and the simplicity with which we approach solving the problem. So in terms of our mission, there's just one core thesis that we have internally, which is that the exchange of digital assets is the most fundamental use case for blockchains, right? Every single crypto application right now that is successful is either directly or indirectly a trading application. If you look at something like Uniswap or OpenSea, these are very clearly exchanges and they are therefore trading applications. If you look at something like StepIn, right? StepIn is a game, but it has a in-game marketplace, and that's where a lot of its activity comes from. So StepIn is also very directly a trading application. If you look at MetaMask or Aave, you wouldn't normally think of them as trading applications, right? Like MetaMask is a wallet, but the core reason that people install these or use like Aave, for example, is to be able to then trade with it, right? Like you install MetaMask so that you can go and trade on chain. You borrow money from Aave so that you can then go to Uniswap and then go ahead and trade it. So these are very clearly indirectly trading applications as well. So everything in crypto is a trading application. And it's also becoming clear that there's going to start just being more and more on-chain trading activity in the future, right? First of all, there's just more and more activity happening year over year in crypto because more people find out about crypto and there's just more interest in trading of digital assets. So that's leading to organic interest. And then there's also more regulation that centralized entities are facing. Like after everything that happened with FTX, now there's all this regulation where it's like, okay, we want to start regulating centralized exchanges better. There's more regulation on stablecoins as well. So there's all this regulation that is happening. And what this is going to result in is some portion of the activity that otherwise would have been happening in a centralized exchange or in a centralized venue will now start moving on-chain as well. So there's going to be a ton more trading activity on chain. The question is then, how do you help support this trading activity, right? How do you help it scale? And that's the core promise that we make to teams. You can focus on user acquisition, because candidly, that is the most important part for making a successful application. You can focus on user acquisition, and we will focus on building the best infrastructure for you. This is something that has resonated with a ton of teams at this point. There's over 160 projects that are building on Sei. And I think the primary reason is just this idea, like they buy into the idea around trading applications having very strong network effects, and this being the ideal infrastructure for them to build their applications on.
That's a nice perspective that most of the projects have a trading aspect to it. So they are all trading platforms.
So candidly, right now, I would say that speculation is one of the strongest use cases for crypto, especially on chain. I think that is going to be changing, but I do think there's going to be a trading component to everything that gets built. Like everything has some tokenization aspect to it. Everything has some kind of marketplace aspect to it. So I don't think that's going to be changing anytime in the near future. If anything, it's going to become more and more integral. And one of the really interesting things about exchanges in trading applications is they have very strong network effects, right? If you end up having liquidity in one ecosystem, then you can build a bunch of other stuff around that benefits from the liquidity. And I think that's also strategically why it makes a lot of sense to be building in an ecosystem where you think there's going to be a lot of liquidity and a lot of trading activity happening.
Okay, so what are these projects like that are building on Sei right now? You mentioned a lot of things like, okay, even an NFT marketplace can be there. So I was like, before talking, I was thinking that, okay, maybe like the major component is going to be like exchanges, like decentralized exchanges. But you mentioned like a lot of things. It could also be like a game like Axie, because they are also like a digital nation and they are also trading. So right now, what is the composition of all these projects and which are the most popular ones? Or what are you most excited about?
Yeah. So one common misconception that people have about Sei is that it's a DeFi focused ecosystem, right?
Okay.
Like they hear the word trading and they're like, okay, it's only DeFi focused applications that are getting built on Sei. That is completely incorrect. Sei is the most general purpose type of ecosystem out there. That's because everything is a trading application, right? Like we're just talking about how games, how like things like Aave, like wallets, like everything is a trading application and everything benefits from trading. So Sei is a very general purpose ecosystem and it's a completely permissionless chain. So anyone can build anything on top of it through writing. We offer a Turing complete smart contracting framework. So you can write any kind of smart contract that you want to on Sei. In terms of the flavors of applications we're seeing games getting created. So there's an esports league called Fable, which I think is super cool. Like different teams can compete against each other. And with something like that, you can get very strong network effects. So there is a cold start problem to get people to start using it. But once people start using it, it suddenly becomes very interesting to engage with that. There's Tatami, that's a game publisher. So that's also super cool because if they're able to start creating a framework for helping games launch, then it suddenly becomes very lucrative to have those games all be part of the Sei ecosystem. There's some of the other projects would be Senate which is political tokens. So people can go and trade on different types of political events, which is super cool as well. And then beyond that, there's more like we're talking before about the DeFi application. So there's basically every flavor of DeFi application and exchange you can think of. There's NFT collections, NFT marketplaces. There's also rollups getting built on Sei right now, which is super cool. Because right now, Sei offers Rust-based CosmWasm smart contracts. Some developers, they want to be writing in different programming languages, and other developers, they just want their own dedicated block space. So we're seeing a SVM rollup, so Solana VM rollup called Nitro getting built right now. We're seeing a Move rollup called Paddle getting built right now. And then there's also projects building ZK ML use cases. The core idea there is you have some kind of model that you run input through off-chain. So let's say that you want to run something through like GPT-4, you run that off-chain, and then you generate a proof saying, okay, I actually ran it through GPT-4 instead of running it through like GPT-2 or GPT-3 instead. And then you can write this zero knowledge proof on-chain. So there's a project building something like that as well. So yeah, I mean, the ecosystem is definitely growing. And the types of use cases that I'm really excited about are, the three that I mentioned right now around gaming, like gaming has super strong network effects. So that's very, very interesting. I think ZK ML and just AI/crypto is underexplored right now. I think that there's like 3 levels to that stack. There's like the user-facing level with like chatbots where none of it is on-chain. I think that's been explored the most. And then there's like these hybrid things like the ZKML project that I was talking about, where some part like proof verification happens on-chain. I think there's a lot more work to be done over there. And then there's the fully on-chain part, where like the entire model, for example, might be living on-chain. I think that has been very, very underexplored. So I think there's a lot of pretty interesting work that could be done over there. And it's like a pretty new field, right? Which is why no one has really spent time in the past several years doing it. Like it only became much more interesting in like the past 6 to 9 months. So yeah, those are the type of applications I think will be very cool to see gain more traction.
Yeah, I think I need to read more about this, about your all the projects there. And what do you think are the top 3 things that developers are looking for when they look for which blockchain to build on, in your experience?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because Sei Labs comes from Silicon Valley, right? Like all of us are basically from San Francisco, and Silicon Valley has this ethos where you want to be building products that solve real user problems. That's like one of YC's core mantras, like build stuff that people want. And I feel like in crypto, it's a very different mentality. In crypto, people are building, like there's a lot of these really cool technical products getting built. I would argue largely for the sake of building cool technical products and not for the sake of solving real user problems. And we think that is just like fundamentally the wrong approach to be using to be building like any kind of infrastructure. Like if you're building a business, you want to be solving customer problems. And that's an approach that we take that is interestingly very different than a lot of crypto companies. So, I mean, yeah, like from our standpoint, like the biggest problem that we want to help solve is like, in terms of trading digital assets on chain and facilitating that process, how do we make that as simple as possible? Because right now it's, as we were talking about before, it's like super clunky, right? If you're trying to do anything on chain, it's super slow. There's this really messy onboarding process. It's just honestly pretty frustrating to like go from a centralized exchange, send your tokens to your wallet, like do all of this stuff. The world that we imagine is one where it's not like that at all. Where trading on a centralized exchange is no different than trading on like a AMM on Sei. And I think that's what really resonates with a lot of teams. Like at the end of the day, the biggest thing that these projects care about is user acquisition, because that's the only way that they're going to become bigger. Like candidly, most developers don't care as much about the infrastructure that they're building on, if that infrastructure is going to help them acquire users and help make their product get more engagement and become successful, right? And I think that's the biggest reason that they end up being interested in Sei, because it seems like that user acquisition problem and that user experience problem, Sei is going to be doing the best job of solving that compared to other ecosystems, which might just be focused on solving technical problems without really thinking about the user problems.
Yeah, no, I think I couldn't agree more. So I really, really want to be a Web3 maxi, and I call myself that, but like it's such a nightmare to get like crypto payments, and you know, making your house run after getting like 100% crypto incomes. And you know, as you just can't ignore a centralized exchange, you know, to deal with that shit. And there are so many times like banks are asking you, okay, how's this happening? Like you have these transactions, and I don't know how far we are. Maybe with your project, we are not that far, hopefully. And also like paying people in crypto, you know, in from different countries. Like example, in India, many people don't want to take crypto payments. It's such a nightmare for them to accept it. Anyway,
so I think that overall around the more kind of adoption standpoint, like social adoption, I think that is very quickly changing. Like I think a couple of years from now, it's going to be much more socially acceptable to be like using crypto for payments. I mean, we're already starting to see this in many countries where crypto is just governments are supporting crypto. But yeah, I think one of the more broad blockers is going to be that user experience that you were mentioning. Like if it's super clunky, then no one's going to want to use it. So I think that's like one of the biggest things that really need to be improved to help with user adoption and to help with improving the process for builders.
Explain our listeners the exchange trilemma that is in your white paper. You explain it very well.
Yeah. So when we got started building an exchange, we saw that it was impossible to get around the exchange trilemma, which is between decentralization, capital efficiency, and scalability. Every exchange out there right now is only able to get 2 of the 3. So if you look at Uniswap V2, for example, right? Uniswap V2 is able to get decentralization and scalability, but not capital efficiency. One of the things that's really bad about Uniswap V2 is that you provide, like the money that you provide as a liquidity provider, you only end up trading at a small part of that. And the rest of the kind of price levels that are being supported, you don't really end up trading on those at all. That's why it led to Uniswap V3, where it was solving that exact problem. You can now offer very specific types of tick ranges that are supported. And the benefit there is that now you get decentralization and capital efficiency, but it's really, really complicated and it's really hard to scale, especially from retail users. So Uniswap V3 is not solving that either. And then if you look at something like Binance, it's centralized. So it does have capital efficiency, it does have scalability, but it's just not able to benefit from decentralization. And I mean, we saw with FTX what happens when you don't have decentralization, because then this exchange could just collapse and you have really no idea what's happening behind the scenes. And we don't think the solution here is to keep iterating on mechanism design. Like, we don't think the solution is to go from Uniswap V2 to V3 to V4. Instead, we think the solution is to do a complete rewrite of the underlying infrastructure. And that's how innovation typically happens. Like, rather than continuing to just do mechanism improvements, when you have a product that has product market fit, it makes a lot more sense to just build new infrastructure to support that product. And we've seen this time and time again in Web 2. There's this idea of application infrastructure cycles, where there's some infrastructure that gets created, and that leads to new applications, which then need more specialized infrastructure. An example of that would be with the database industry. So you started off with Oracle and other similar types of products. This led to all of the Web 1 and Web 2 applications that we use today. And now some of these applications need much more specialized infrastructure, right? So you have things like Databricks Warehouse getting created, specifically for AI and ML. We think it's going to be the exact same thing with crypto. We saw Ethereum as one of the first general smart contracting platforms. From there, we started seeing all the decentralized applications that we use today, things like Uniswap, Aave, etc. A lot of these decentralized applications did not find product market fit. Exchanges did, though, right? Exchanges got a lot of real adoption. The question then just becomes, how do you help them scale? And we think that you need to build specialized infrastructure that is basically tailor-made, where every single part of the stack is optimized for these exchanges to help them scale.
Yeah, makes sense. Now that you spoke about Web 2, Web 3, and I think in another answer you were mentioning that how crypto, like let's say chaos is like, the USP of Web 3 and crypto. We thrive on chaos. And generally, like also I came from Web 2 marketing and then I came into Web 3 and then I just realized that it's absolutely different how it works. So as a founder, like somebody, as a builder in Web 3 now, you've been in Web 2 before, what do you think are the good parts we can take from Web 2 into Web 3? And also the good parts from Web 3, there are many, that can go to Web 2.
Yeah. So interestingly, I don't really think there should be that big of a difference in terms of building a business between Web 2 and Web 3. And this kind of ties into like how in Web 3, there's this like very different way of thinking, like, okay, just building tech for technology's sake. I think that also applies to go-to-market and like building a business, right? And I mean, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're building a business and then you want people to start adopting what you're using. So in many ways, that's similar to being a SaaS company. And honestly, that's kind of what a crypto infrastructure provider like a layer 1 or layer 2 is. You're building infrastructure, and then afterwards, developers are the customers who are building on top of this infrastructure. So I think one thing that Sei Foundation does quite differently than many other chains is just thinking about it logically as a SaaS business and helping kind of go to market in a similar way. So I think that would be one of the things that, rather than looking down on Web 2, just looking at how really successful products, especially SaaS companies in Web 2 were built. Like if you're building infrastructure, looking at SaaS companies, if you're building some kind of consumer-facing application, looking at social media applications specifically, I think would be really good. And just looking at how they succeeded in the past 10 years in Web 2. I think that would offer a lot of learnings around what kind of growth strategies to use to start getting more and more adoption. In terms of things from Web 3 that can be used in Web 2, I think decentralization is the biggest thing that would be helpful. And again, going back to my story from before about Robinhood, like you feel incredibly powerless when you have no transparency. And especially if there's your own money on the line, it can be super, super frustrating. So just having that type of transparency would be massive in terms of improving a lot of these financial applications in Web2 as well.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's actually one of the biggest pain points. And I also feel like it's not a war between Web 2 and Web 3, that I see on Twitter all the time, in communities all the time. Like the other day I was in a meetup and they literally say that, oh, I met this Web 2 person. I'm like, guys, this is not the way to introduce somebody, So yeah, that's cool. Okay, I went through your Twitter and I read a very interesting tweet where I literally read it now. So if you're interested in joining a startup, being part of a winning startup is the single greatest thing to optimize for. And personally, like it's a question for me, and I think a question for many people in Web3 who are looking for this right project. It's so difficult to find, this place that you want to grow with, and having like 2-3 jobs, multiple projects is like most how Web3 talent is. So how do you really identify this winning startup in the Web3 landscape? Like, what are the 2-3 things I can look for?
Yeah. So that quote, so that tweet, it's interesting because people are like, oh yeah, obviously you should join the winning company. Like, why? That's not really that huge of a thought. But I think one thing that folks often do is they might take an offer where they have like a bigger role. For example, being like a VP at one place versus being maybe not a VP at another place. Or taking a job where they're getting slightly more money, maybe like 5-10% more cash compensation, and making their decisions based off of that. And I think that's fundamentally the wrong way to think about joining a company, especially a startup. When you're joining a startup, you're optimizing in the case where things go well. And when things go well, like that's largely going to be the main thing that determines the both the compensation that you receive, because your equity is structured around like if the startup ends up being successful, you'll end up making much more money through equity from that. And also the way that your resume and your career is viewed. If you work at a successful startup, then your resume ends up being, and your experiences end up being much more valuable, and your future opportunities end up being a lot better as well, right? So in terms of like what makes a successful company, I think that is a tough question. But I'll say there's a few things that stand out to me as being ubiquitous in like every single company that ends up making it. I think having a team, especially a founding team, but like the initial group of people that you'd be working with, that are, first of all, extremely hardworking. That's kind of unavoidable. Like if you have a team where people kind of are resting investing and it's like a 3-person company, that's definitely not going to succeed. So a team where people are super hardworking and persevering, because things are always going to go to shit in a startup. Like this is something I didn't really appreciate back when I was working at Robinhood, but behind every like major kind of breakthrough that a company has, there's probably dozens of things that went wrong and that you just kind of needed to slog through to get to that finishing line. So I think a team that's like hardworking, persevering, and one thing that I would say, especially for crypto, is a team that is good at go-to-market. Because tying back into what I was saying before about most projects just being super tech focused, building good technology does not mean that people are going to use that technology. And you only end up being successful if you're able to get a lot of people using whatever you're building. So the teams in crypto that end up succeeding are the ones that have an average or above average product from a technical standpoint, but that have a very good go-to-market. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things to look at when you're considering joining a company, because most companies in crypto, I just don't think meet that bar. So yeah, that would be my thoughts around that.
Yeah. No, I think it's, and then, all bad decisions become very bad decisions when there's bear market, because you lose those jobs and those projects go. And it's like such a underestimated thing not to choose your gig wisely in crypto. Mm-hmm. So for Sei, when you were looking for a team, tell me a bit about the initial process of finding the core team. Who was involved in it? What was the process? How long it took?
Yeah. So I think we got really lucky. like there's some lucky breaks that you just end up getting when you're starting something. And I think getting the initial team together was one of those lucky breaks for us. So me and my co-founder, we were both based in SF at the time. And we just reached out to our friends like, yo, would you be interested in like learning more about what we're doing? And we were building a layer one blockchain, and a layer one blockchain is a really, really interesting distributed systems problem, right? Like compared to what you would be normally doing at a place like Robinhood, it is one of the most intellectually interesting things you can be doing. So I think from an engineering standpoint, a lot of engineers were very interested from places like Robinhood, Databricks, Google, Airbnb. And that ended up being a lot of our initial founding team, just folks that are really driven by the interesting technical problems. The overall process around that, I mean, we started hitting up our friends. It took like maybe a month to get the initial team together, and then we're off to the races. So I think that we ended up having a much easier time around this because the product that we're building is just intellectually very interesting. And also because we're based in Silicon Valley. Like finding good engineers, if you've basically grown up in Silicon Valley, I think is a much easier thing to do versus like finding a good engineering team if you might not have those same types of connections earlier on.
So is your entire team in Silicon Valley, or is it?
Not anymore now. So
Yeah.
we're currently 25 folks. We're spread out all over the world, so we're actually very, very distributed. So we have folks in the US, and we also have people in Europe and East Asia as well. So yeah, I mean, now at this point, I would say that we are completely remote, fully distributed, and there are definitely operational issues, like communication issues specifically, that come from having a distributed team. So I think there's pros and cons to like being spread out all over the world versus just being located in SF with the entire team.
Yeah, I think everybody is always working for your team in Web3, and you wake up to like 100 Discord messages.
No, it's terrible. Like I wake up every morning and that's the first thing I see, just like 100 messages, and I'm like, all right, this is a great start to the day.
Yeah. No, and it's actually a problem. But then, yeah, I'll ask you some fun questions about that in the end part of this podcast. Mm-hmm. Another thing is like you raised capital in 2023 after a very tough 2022, where there was, but I think in a way you guys like sort of made the case for your product, because of so much shit happening in the centralized exchange area. But tell me a bit about that experience of raising capital, coming from maybe like say not 100% crypto native background as you were in Robinhood.
Yeah.
What did you find different about raising capital in Web3?
Yeah, so we got started raising our initial round around May, June timeframe of 2022. This is our seed round. Mm-hmm. This is right after Terra collapsed, right? So it definitely was not like the perfect time to be fundraising. Interestingly, things have just gotten worse and worse since then. So I think in retrospect, that was good for us. But at that time, we were like, oh shit, why didn't we just try raising a couple of months earlier? That would have made things somewhat easier for us. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think for the seed round, what ended up really mattering was our team. I think investors were really bought into our team, our different backgrounds, and also the strength of the engineering team, given that we already had something ready on testnet. So we ended up getting Multicoin Capital leading that round, who, I mean, is one of the biggest crypto investors out there. So we're super happy to be working with them. And then, I mean, this was a $5 million round that we announced in August of last year. So we had several years of runway at that point. So we were just heads down building, right? We wanted to get testnets out. We wanted to start getting more projects that were being supported. So we just continued doing that. We saw FTX collapse happening. We're like, I wonder how the fundraising environment is going to change from that. And it definitely became a lot worse. But interestingly enough, Sei was getting a lot of traction at that point, right? Like when we raised our seed round, we had like less than 10 projects that were building on Sei. And then over the next several months, like we started getting dozens and dozens of projects that are committing to building on Sei. And this was traction that like was honestly pretty unique because a lot of people were leaving crypto at that time to start doing stuff in AI or just because they got burned and they need their break. And Sei was one of the few projects that was actually having a lot more ecosystem growth at the time. So in January of this year, we started getting inbound from investors. Like they were seeing the traction. They're like, can we invest? And initially we're like, we don't really want to raise any money right now because like we just raised around like 5 months ago. Like we don't need any cash. But then we started getting like, I mean, a ton of inbound interest. And we also thought to ourselves, like, we don't really know if the investing situation is like fundraising situation is going to get any better. By the time we need capital, like a year and a half or 2 years from now, like maybe things might be harder then. So that's why February we started a proper process. And yeah, I mean, we ended up closing the 30 million Series A. We were able to get a lot of really great partners around the table, like Jump, for example, Distributed Global, and a lot of others. So super happy how that came together. And I think the biggest thing that really mattered was just the traction that Sei was seeing from like an ecosystem growth and technical standpoint.
So what changed after getting your second round? Like, did it change your roadmap? And generally, what does the roadmap look like? When are you going on mainnet? And what can we look forward to in the next 6 months from Sei?
Yeah. Mainnet is coming soon. Sei Foundation will have more updates around that. I mean, today the date is August 10th. By the time this gets published, there might be more updates from the Sei Foundation around that. And yeah, I mean, after the mainnet launch happens, whatever that is, the biggest focus is going to be on helping get more developers to learn more about Sei and to start building. Because a layer one really only succeeds if there are a lot of normal users, a lot of normal folks that are using the ecosystem. Normal people don't come for the tech, right? Like my mom and my sister, they're not going to be like, oh, I want to use Sei because this tech is super cool. Like,
even me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, even me, I'm not going to go and use like this really interesting tech purely for the sake of the tech. Like to get over that kind of burden, like that threshold, people need to give a shit about something that's happening in the ecosystem. And I think every piece of crypto infrastructure succeeded has had that kind of killer application. Yeah, every single layer one, layer two, like everything that has taken off has been because there's been killer applications. And killer applications don't just like organically appear. You need to support good developers to build these killer applications. So the biggest kind of overarching focus is going to be on growing out the ecosystem and especially the developer ecosystem. And then, I mean, from more of like a technical roadmap, the bigger things that we want to focus on are around improving performance and improving decentralization. So just supporting different ways to reduce time to finality, improve throughput, and then support things like light clients to enable better verification with low hardware costs for end users.
Yeah. And you have an ecosystem fund as well. What are you looking for in people, developers, builders that apply for this fund?
Yeah, so Sei has a $120 million ecosystem fund. This is liquidity that has been committed by both investors, market makers, and other ecosystem participants like exchanges. And they're basically saying that, look, if you're building something cool, we'll either invest money into you or we'll provide liquidity on-chain to help your product start getting more traction. And yeah, I mean, the biggest thing we're looking for is products that are like building something cool. And then afterwards, like anyone that's building anything that is getting traction and that is solving a real user problem, I think it'll be pretty easy to help facilitate some kind of ecosystem fund process with the Sei Foundation around that. And beyond that, like a couple of the other things that are going to be focus points is the Entrepreneur in Residence program. So Sei Labs will be supporting an EIR program where any good developers or any good founders can join, and then they will be able to get something built, and then Sei can help with the go-to-market standpoint. And yeah, I mean, besides that, there's going to be more hackathons and more community events being organized as well.
Do you have a standard ticket size for the fund or the EIR program?
No, the Sei Foundation will handle things for the fund. I don't think that they publicly commented on the ticket size.
Okay. Okay, nice. So now we have like a rapid fire, like some fun questions to know you outside your crypto life. So actually I didn't prepare it, but let's see what I come up with spontaneously. So which year was your first crypto transaction?
2017. Yeah, that was an absolutely insane time. And I mean, I got into crypto in the middle of the 2017 bull market. And yeah, I mean, some of the fun stories around back then, like, so Facebook would give new grad software engineers 100K signing bonuses. And my friends who were graduating at the time, they would literally take their signing bonuses and dump it all into like Ether or some of the more, I guess back then they were putting in just like Litecoin and some of the more crazy, like Stellar and other crazy cryptocurrencies. And they were just seeing like it rise up. Like they just dumped 100K into it. It'd become like several hundreds of thousands. And yeah, that was absolutely insane time period.
And was it on a yeah. Okay. No, that
Yeah, I
makes sense.
guess when they were trading, they would be trading on centralized exchanges.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the one thing that you do outside crypto to, unwind? What's that hobby that you wish you did more if you had more time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, running has been the most helpful thing to do outside of working. Both because it helps just from a pure exercise perspective, but also because it is kind of a meditative thing. Like when you're running somewhat slowly, it doesn't feel
Mhm.
hard after you go past the first like 3 months where it actually feels like complete shit. But after the first 3 months, like it just feels meditative and you can just completely zone out. And yeah, it ends up being really good for just thinking about whatever is on my mind.
Do you get to do it every day?
Not every day, but I try to do it as much as I can. When I first got started with all this, that time it was just like working all the time. And I think being in that sprint mentality works for like a few months. But if you're operating on the order of years, it's just bad to be not exercising at all or like not taking any
Mhm.
time for yourself. For us, it's been almost like 2 years now. And yeah, I try to be more intentional about exercising and making sure I have time to like at least rest a little bit each day.
Yeah. I think that's also one of the things like, but now they do this touch grass thing on Twitter, right? Did you touch grass today? So I was like, okay, cool. This is something cool coming out. Is there any podcast that you listen to regularly or okay, let's say it can be a book or a podcast, that you
I
resonate the
mean,
most with?
there's several crypto podcasts that I listen to.
No, not crypto. We
Okay.
need another answer.
Let's see. I mean, there's the All In podcast, which is a tech podcast, which is engaging to listen to. Yeah, besides that, I don't really listen to too many like kind of normal hobby related podcasts.
Okay, and are you into books?
I used to read a lot of books before, like listening to just different types of podcasts. And
Mhm.
yeah, in the past 2 years, I have read zero books, unfortunately.
Okay. And what is that one advice? Doesn't need to be like professional advice, but you think that that is something you would really like to pass on, that you impacted your life?
Hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, this is professional advice. I was talking with my friend about this a couple of days ago. But it's really easy to just be like complacent wherever you are. And a lot of people, they like want to start something, but they don't know what to be starting. And then their current job is good enough. So then they stay there. I think the only real way to do something that you really want to do is by putting yourself in new situations. This could be by like going and living somewhere new. This could be by changing your jobs and starting a job in a different field. But the only way that you can have significant changes in your life is by at least starting that process yourself, by putting yourself in new situations. You get exposed to new things, and that can set off like an entirely different trajectory for you to go down.
Yeah, never gets old getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, 100%.
Um, and what has been your biggest FOMO moment in crypto? Oh, I wish I knew this, or I
Let's
invested.
see. I have made a lot of poor NFT purchases in the past couple of years. Basically not being part of the whitelist and then buying right after it launches because of the hype. And every single time I've done that, I've lost money. So I would definitely not recommend buying the day of a new NFT launch.
Okay. Okay, this is a first fun one. This actually I wrote. So if Sei Labs had a mascot, what would it be and why?
So we have the Sei is named after a Norwegian whale. It's like the fastest whale. Deeply, it like lives pretty deep in the water as well. So it's like a play on deep liquidity. So I think the mascot would be one of two things. The first would be a sailor, because that is what we call folks from the Sei community. And there's like a sailor hat, so it could just be a sailor. I think another mascot would be a whale, but a whale is a pretty boring mascot because everyone in crypto uses that mascot.
Yeah, I think it's overused, but the first one is nice.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. And this we ask everybody. I just like to see if I get the same answer from everyone. So, if you could have dinner with one of the crypto OGs, who would it be and what would you ask them?
That is not something that I have thought about before. Um, so, I mean, I think one person who would be really interesting to talk to would be Anatoly. from Solana. And I mean, I have chatted with him and been on like panels and stuff with him in the past. But I think that Solana is one of those projects that is approaching at least the technical side in a very different and I would say thoughtful ways compared to many other crypto projects. So I really like the way that they approach building the technical side of their product, and would love to just chat more about the direction they see that going in, a lot of the technical improvements they have on the roadmap, and also like how they view community building, especially after everything with FTX went down.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't expecting that answer. You want to know which is the most common one, or you want to guess which is
Vitalik.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Most of them say Vitalik. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So, Jay, this was so much fun talking to you and knowing more about Sei Labs. And this will, I'm sure, get me into the rapid hole to know even more about the project. Thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you enjoyed us.
Yeah.
And we will leave all the, your Twitter handle and everything in the show notes so people can reach out.
Perfect. Yeah, this is a lot of fun, Diksha. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to just DM me on Twitter and I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Yes, thank you so much.